Before the world knew Syria for its conflict, it knew it for its history. This was a land where ancient civilizations left their mark. You could walk through the bustling souks of Damascus, said to be the oldest continuously inhabited city on earth, and feel the weight of centuries. The air was thick with the scent of spices, the sound of merchants calling out their wares, and the murmur of countless conversations. Families would gather in the courtyards of their homes, sharing meals of kibbeh, tabbouleh, grilled meats. The rhythm of life was dictated by tradition, by family, and by the call to prayer echoing from historic minarets. It was a place of profound beauty and deep cultural roots. Life for many Syrians was in many ways ordinary. Children went to school, dreaming of becoming doctors, engineers, artists. Parents went to work, striving to provide for their families. On weekends, parks would be filled with laughter as families picnicked under the shade of olive trees. In cities like Aleppo, known for its magnificent ancient citadel, life was a vibrant tapestry of commerce and community. People from different faiths had coexisted for generations, their lives interwoven in the fabric of society. The idea that this would become a dateline for war reports was unthinkable. The year was 2011. A wave of protests, which came to be known as the Arab Spring, was sweeping across the Middle East and North Africa. In Tunisia, in Egypt, people were taking to the streets demanding dignity, freedom, and an end to authoritarian rule. Syrians watched these events unfold on their television screens and on the internet. A quiet hope, long suppressed, began to stir. For decades, the country had been under the control of the Assad family, first Hafez and then his son Bashar. Political dissent was not tolerated. The security services were a pervasive, feared presence. But seeing ordinary people topple powerful regimes elsewhere planted a seed. That seed sprouted in the southern city of Daraa, a dusty agricultural town near the Jordanian border. It wasn't started by politicians or generals, it was started by children. A group of teenagers, inspired by the slogans they saw from other Arab countries, scrawled anti-government graffiti on a school wall. Their message was simple: "It's your turn, doctor." A direct reference to President Bashar al-Assad, a trained ophthalmologist. Their act of youthful defiance was met with a brutal response. The boys were arrested, and according to their families and human rights groups, tortured. This act of cruelty against children was the spark that lit the fuse. The community in Daraa was outraged. Elders and parents went to the local authorities, demanding the release of their sons. They were met with contempt and threats. This disrespect was too much to bear. On Friday, March 18, 2011, after midday prayers, people poured into the streets of Daraa. They weren't calling for war, they were calling for justice. They chanted for freedom, for dignity, and for the release of the children. The government's response was not negotiation or dialogue, it was violence. Security forces opened fire on the unarmed protesters, and people were killed. The initial phase of the uprising was defined by peaceful protest. Every Friday, Syrians from all walks of life would gather, holding signs and chanting for a new future. They hoped for a political solution, they hoped for a transition of power. But the government's playbook had only one chapter: overwhelming force. As the death toll mounted, the nature of the conflict began to shift. Some soldiers in the Syrian Arab army, ordered to fire on their own people, refused. They laid down their weapons and joined the protesters, becoming the first defectors. These defectors began to form small local militias to protect demonstrators from attack. This was the beginning of the Free Syrian Army, or FSA. At first it was a loose, disorganized collection of armed groups with a shared goal to overthrow the Assad government. The conflict was no longer just about protesters and security forces, it was becoming militarized. The government, in turn, escalated its tactics dramatically. It began to use tanks, it began to use artillery, it began to use eventually its air force against its own cities. Neighborhoods that were centers of protest, like Baba Amr and Homs, were besieged and shelled relentlessly. The battle lines were being drawn not on some distant battlefield, but in the streets where children once played. The year 2012 marked a critical turning point. The violence spiraled out of control, and the conflict morphed into a full-blown civil war. It was no longer a simple fight between the government and the FSA. The chaos created a vacuum, and extremist groups with their own brutal ideologies began to emerge. Groups like the Al-Nusra Front, an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, and later the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or ISIS, moved into seized territory. Their arrival transformed the war, making it far more complex and savage. They fought against the government, They fought against the moderate opposition. They fought against each other, imposing a terrifying version of Islamic law. For ordinary Syrians, this meant the war was now coming from all sides. In any conflict, the most profound and lasting tragedy is what happens to the children. For an entire generation of Syrian kids, war is the only reality they have ever known. They were born into a world of explosions and displacement, where the sound of a jet overhead doesn't inspire wonder, but terror. Their childhoods were stolen. Playgrounds were replaced by rubble-strewn streets, schools became shelters or targets. Instead of learning to read and write, many learned to distinguish the whistle of an incoming mortar from the roar of a barrel bomb. Their games were not of hide-and-seek, but of survival. Think of Omran Daknish, the 5-year-old boy whose image stunned the world in 2016. Pictured sitting alone in an ambulance, his face covered in dust and blood, dazed and silent. He became a symbol of the war's innocent victims. He had just been pulled from the rubble of his family's home in Aleppo after an airstrike. He didn't cry, he just sat, wiping the blood from his own face. His story is just one of millions. Countless children have been killed, injured, or left with deep psychological scars that may never heal. They suffer from anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder on an epidemic scale. Education, the bedrock of any child's future, has been decimated. Thousands of schools have been damaged or destroyed. In many areas, it became too dangerous for children to attend. For those who could still go to school, classrooms were often crowded, and in underground basements where the fear of an attack was constant. This has created a lost generation of Syrian children who have missed years of schooling. Without an education, their opportunities are severely limited. The war in Syria, it fundamentally redefined the meaning of home. For millions, the place where they were born, where their families had lived for generations, just ceased to be a sanctuary. It became a target. Apartment buildings, once filled with the sounds of life, reduced to skeletal husks. Entire neighborhoods were leveled by relentless shelling and airstrikes. Photo albums, children's drawings on the fridge, furniture passed down through generations. And then, in a single moment, an explosion could turn all of it into dust and memory. The loss was not just of a physical structure, but of a whole world. Daily life became a constant negotiation with danger. Even simple routines were fraught with peril. Going out to buy bread meant risking sniper fire. Sending your children to school, if one was even open, was an act of faith. Hospitals, which are supposed to be protected places of healing, were systematically targeted. Doctors and nurses worked in secret, underground facilities, performing surgery with dwindling supplies and by the light of cell phones. Access to clean water and electricity became a luxury. The story of one woman, Hassan, from eastern Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus, really illustrates this reality. For years, her neighborhood was under a brutal siege. Food was so scarce that she had to boil grass and leaves to feed her children. She described the constant fear, the hunger that gnaws at your insides, and the helplessness of watching her children grow thin and weak. Her home, once a place of comfort, became a prison. The Syrian conflict did not happen in a vacuum. From the early days, other countries began to get involved, turning a civil war into a complex international proxy battle. Each country had its own interests, and the Syrian people were caught in the middle. The reasons were complicated: geopolitics, religious affiliations, strategic rivalries. A local uprising became a chessboard for global and regional powers. On one side, Assad got crucial support: Iran. Iran wanted to keep influence and protect Hezbollah. Iran provided military advisors, Iran provided financial aid, Iran mobilized thousands of Shia militiamen. Fighters came from Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon. That support was a lifeline when Assad seemed close to collapse. It gave government forces the manpower to fight across fronts. In 2015, Russia intervened directly. Russia said it was fighting terrorists like ISIS, but many airstrikes hit moderate rebel groups too. Russian air power let Syrian forces go on the offensive and reclaim territory. That intervention shifted the balance and ensured Assad's survival. On the other side, a diverse coalition backed the opposition. United States, United Kingdom, France, regional backers, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey. They sent money and weapons to many rebel factions. But support was fragmented and uncoordinated. Different countries backed different groups with competing ideologies. That caused infighting among the opposition, and it helped extremist groups grow stronger. For Syrians, the result was more weapons, more factions, a war that became bloodier and more prolonged. As the war intensified, staying in Syria became impossible for millions. Faced with an unbearable choice between staying and risking death, leaving everything behind for an unknown future, this triggered one of the largest refugee crises of our time. Over half of Syria's pre-war population has been forced from their homes. More than 6 million people are internally displaced within Syria, constantly moving to escape the shifting front lines. And more than 6 million have become refugees, crossing borders into neighboring countries and beyond in a desperate search for safety. The journey itself is often a life-threatening ordeal. Families walk for days, paying their life savings to smugglers, risking capture, risking extortion, risking drowning. We all remember the heartbreaking image of Alan Kurdi, a 3-year-old Syrian boy whose body washed up on a Turkish beach in 2015. He and his family were trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea in a flimsy boat to reach Europe. His death became a global symbol of the desperation of Syrian refugees and the perilous journeys they undertake. They are not leaving for economic opportunity, they are fleeing bombs, sieges, the complete collapse of their society. For those who make it across a border, the struggle is far from over. Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan. These countries, despite their own limited resources, have shown incredible generosity. But their infrastructure is stretched to the breaking point. Many refugees end up in sprawling, overcrowded camps, such as the Zaatari camp in Jordan, which has grown into a makeshift city. Here, life is a daily struggle for the basics: food, clean water, shelter, medical care. People live in tents, temporary shelters. In the face of unimaginable destruction and loss, the most extraordinary thing to witness in Syria is the resilience of its people. It is a quiet, stubborn defiance against the despair that threatens to consume everything. Even in cities reduced to rubble, life persists. You see it in the small acts of normalcy that people struggle to reclaim. A shopkeeper sweeps the pavement in front of his bombed-out store, preparing to open for the few customers who remain. A group of children find a makeshift ball. They start a game of soccer in a cratered street. Their laughter a powerful sound amidst the silence of destruction. This resilience is embodied by groups like the Syrian Civil Defense, more famously known as the White Helmets. They are ordinary people, bakers, teachers, tailors, who became volunteer rescue workers. When the bombs fall, they rush in. They dig through the rubble with their bare hands, searching for survivors. White helmets carrying a child. Their motto, taken from the Quran, is, "To save one life is to save all of humanity." They have saved tens of thousands of lives working in the most dangerous conditions imaginable. They represent a profound commitment to human life in a conflict that has shown so little regard for it. Art and culture have also become acts of resistance and survival. In besieged areas, artists have painted murals on the walls of destroyed buildings. Musicians have played instruments in the ruins, their melodies a protest against the noise of war. A librarian in the town of Daraya secretly collected books from bombed-out homes. As of today, September 19, 2025, the Syrian war has entered a new, grim phase. Syria is a fractured nation, carved up into different zones of control. The government of Bashar al-Assad, with the backing of Russia, with the backing of Iran, has retaken most of the country. Pockets in the north remain under the control of Turkish-backed forces, pockets remain under Kurdish-led groups. The violence is less intense, but it has been replaced by a crushing economic crisis. The Syrian pound has collapsed, inflation is rampant. The price of basics, bread, fuel, medicine, has skyrocketed. More than 90% of the population is pushed into poverty. The country's infrastructure is in ruins. Power grids, water systems, hospitals, schools, destroyed and needing decades to rebuild. International sanctions also make life harder. For many, life is a daily struggle for survival. The bombs may have stopped falling in many places, but the suffering continues. The political situation remains frozen. No meaningful progress toward settlement. Millions of refugees remain afraid to return. They fear retribution from the government, forced conscription into the army, the inability to make a living. The question of justice remains unanswered, yet hope is not entirely extinguished. It lives in a Syrian mother providing one meal a day. It lives in a teacher holding classes in a tent in a refugee camp. One day the world may know Syria again for its history, culture, and resilience.